Hello, everybody. Wow, okay, I'm glad I'm not late. Guess whose computer clock is off again? So maybe my computer has this virus. That's not funny, I guess. Um, if it's a computer, I guess it's okay. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. Um, as you can see from the first slide, we're moving on to Judaism, but not just this minute. It's so important to look at these primary documents from religious systems, and so except for Dorian and Natalia, I'm going to ask you to read slides in turn, just to keep you involved. Um, so. Um, yeah, anyway, to get a feel for what the original documents of a religious system are like, what they look like and sound like, in philosophy and in the philosophy of religion, we talked about apportioning faith to the evidence. In other words, it seems reasonable to associate the level of our commitment to something or how something affects our life. So remember, religiously, so what governs depends on how consistent and substantial the evidence is that the thing we're considering really is what governs our life, no matter what, whether we're willing to be honest about it or not. So we look at religious documents that are the basis and the foundation and the beginnings of a religious system, and think to ourselves, ask ourselves, how reliable does this sound? Does this sound like it is accurately describing reality to us, or not? So let's go ahead then and have a look at some of these documents. So uh, Chris, can you read this slide for us, please?
Of course I can.
Thank you.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, recite in the name of your Lord, who created man from clots of blood. Recite, your Lord is the most beautiful one, or bountiful one, who by the pen taught man what he did not know. Indeed, man transgresses in thinking himself his own master, for to your Lord all things return. Observe the man who rebukes our servant when he prays. Think, does he follow the right guidance, or enjoin true piety? Think, if he denies the truth and give no heed, does he not know that God observes all things? No. Let him detest, or we will drag him by the forelock, his lying, sinful forelock. Then let him call his helpmates. We, in our turn, will call the guards of hell. No, never obey him. Prostrate yourself and come nearer.
All right. Thank you, Chris, very much. So you'll notice, if you read much of the Quran, you'll notice this kind of language in there a lot. And this is, of course, kind of critical, essential, fundamental to Islam, because it is a ethically based system. So here's the law. Here's what you need to do to have a good life now and to have paradise after this life is, be a good person according to God's expectations of you as revealed. Now remember, from Old Testament, New Testament, and then finally the Quran. But no one, I mean, it's how can a person really seriously contend that they are keeping the law or have kept the law perfectly, what God expects? And so you find this mention of being merciful, and there's a couple of reasons to think that God is merciful, or suppose that he's merciful. One reason is because where are we if he is not? And so that's the human need side of the equation. But just because humans need or want something to be so, doesn't necessarily make it so. So the other possibility is that God has provided mercy for us, or forgiveness. Kind of think big here, broad concepts of mercy and forgiveness, simply because that's his nature. to do so. And so because God's nature is to be merciful and we need him to be merciful, that's the way forward. Or, and we'll look at this again next week, is there something more substantial than that? In other words, has God provided a basis upon which his mercy rests or from which it flows? In other words, the vicarious atonement of the Son of God in the person of Jesus Christ, as described in the Bible. So, again, we'll come back to that next week. So, creation created man from clots of blood. I can't say I know what else the Quran has to say about the particulars of creation, but that is a curious text in a beginning. Then also, here's just some practical knowledge, and I think every religious system would ask us to consider this, because none of us, I don't think, are our own masters, even if we feel like it or have the experience of that during our life. There comes a time in life when we clearly are not the masters of our own destiny, like when we're ill or dying, especially. And then here, this a concern for deceit. And some pretty powerful language here about what to do with a deceptive person. And so this may be one of many texts that are related to the jihad idea that that fundamentalists would draw upon and say, look, this is just how seriously this is the intensity with which God expects us to deal with deceit. So, so let's go on to the next slide. And Jeffrey, can you read this slide for us, please?
I sure can. You may chance to omit a part of what is revealed to you and be distressed because they say, why has no treasure been sent to him? Why has no angel come with him? But you are only to give warning. God is the guardian of all things. If they say he has invented it himself, say to them, produce 10 invented chapters like it. Call on whom you will among your idols. If what you say be true, but if they fail you, know that it is revealed with God's knowledge, and that there is not God but him. Will you then accept Islam?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Beautifully done. All right, so here's the subject of authentication. How do you know that the Quran is real? And notice what the answer is go ahead and look at it yourself, and then compare it to other writings of humans. And this is just a rational approach to things. Of course, it's advocating Islam on the basis of the Quran. If a person said, okay, well, look at the New Testament or look at the Old Testament, and a Muslim would say, well, yeah, we recognize those books and the prophets and Jesus as a prophet and Muhammad as the last of the prophets, so that's understood. But outside of the Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, can you find religious texts that look like this does, bearing the marks of being divinely inspired? That's what we're getting at. So a rational approach, and I've just started the class with advocating that it is reasonable not only to apportion our convictions about things with the evidence that's available, but necessarily then to have looked at the evidence and to give what presents itself as evidence the best of all possible hearings, just to be sure we're not missing something or being careless with something that we need to know. So just think about how, not only through history, but even today, the world would be a much more peaceable, friendly environment, and we would all benefit from that peace and friendliness if we started always with charity, inviting people to share with us the basis of their convictions, rather than just going to war with them right away or making or having assumptions about them that are not based in fact. So wonderful approach here, looking at original documents. Okay, next, let's see. Michael, will you give this a read, please?
Me, Michael?
Yes, you, Michael Beld.
Throned above the waters, he made the heavens and the earth in 6 days, to find out which of you shall best acquit himself.
Okay, thank you. A short text, but also having to do with a number of topics in religion. So it has to do with the nature of God up here, again, with origins. So he made the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Now, one of the consistent features through the history of Islam is this idea of being open to discovery, not open to challenges that contradict the teachings of the Quran, but open to discoveries that further reveal what the content of the Quran is. So you'll find, I'm sure, Islamic fundamentalists who will read this literally, just the way Jews or Christians might insist that the Hebrew text of Genesis is literal, and it is claiming, at least, that God is claiming to say that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 literal days. And then you'll find other people who mean to be devout, whether it's to Judaism or Islam or Christianity, that will say that's not necessarily fundamental to the teaching. And so they'll argue that their religious text is compatible with the discoveries of science, and so 6 days is in some way not literal, but meaning to convey some notion about the period of time over which evolutionary processes took place. Of course, the one important difference is that both people outside and inside Islam are going to argue that it's important that God set creation or evolution in motion, and that God was still there, present, and even involved in the evolutionary processes that science describes for us. Okay, and where am I? Alyssa, can you read this? Maybe read half the slide and then let your sister read the other half.
When your Lord said to the angels, I am placing on the earth one that shall rule as my deputy, they replied, Will you put there one that will do evil and shed blood when we have for so long sung your praises and sanctified your name? He said, I know what you know not. He taught Adam the names of all the things and then set them before the angels, saying, Tell me the names of these if what you say to be true. And when we said to the angels, Prostrate yourselves before Adam, they all prostrated themselves except Satan, who is in his pride refused and became an unbeliever. Okay, I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going. To Adam we said, Dwell with your wife in paradise and eat of its fruits to your heart's content whenever you will, but never approach this tree or you shall both become transgressors. But Satan removed them thence and then brought about their banishment. Go hence, we said, and be enemies to each other. The earth will for a while provide your dwelling and sustenance. Then Adam received commandments from his Lord, and his Lord relented towards him. He is the forgiving one, the merciful.
Okay, great, thank you. So another important text about origins, and you can see, as we have seen earlier, that you can see and hear the Genesis account in the background here, although with some significant differences. Okay, then regarding salvation, Dayton, can you read this slide, please?
Yeah. This book, whose verses are perfected and made plain, is a revelation from him who is wise and all-knowing. Serve none but God. I am sent to you from him to warn you and to give you good tidings. Seek forgiveness of your Lord and turn to him in repentance. A goodly provision he will make for you till an appointed day, and will bestow grace on those who have merit. But if you give no heed, then beware the torment of a fateful day. To God you shall all return. He has power over all things.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so very prominent here, the forgiveness of the Lord, this language of turning in repentance. Here's an interesting combination. He will bestow grace on those that have merit, and this is the difficulty here. So if you have merit, you would think that grace isn't necessary. If you're lacking merit, that's when grace is necessary. But I suspect the point here is that inasmuch as you were devoted or devout, right? And so remember, Muslim means submission to Allah. So inasmuch as you are capable of submitting yourself and in repentance, and this is where the language of genuineness and sincerity and authenticity kind of come up. That is the key, rather than just a simple, account or record of whether you did right or wrong, and we'll add it up, and subtract one or the other. And if you did more wrong than right, then there's no hope for you. And so the grace is sort of it's kind of both a reward for the devotion to God, and it's a remedy for the failure for that devotion or sincerity to actually succeed in the course of your life. Okay, and Alec, can you read this one, please?
Had it been God's will, he could have made them all one religion. But God brings whom he will into his mercy. The wrongdoers have none to befriend or help him. Have they set up guardians beside him? Surely God alone is the guardian. He resurrects the dead and has power over all things. He has ordained the faith which he enjoined on Noah and which we have revealed to you, which we enjoined on Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, saying, observe the faith and do not divide yourselves into faction. But hard for the pagans is that to which you call them. God chooses for it whom he will, and guides it to those that repent. The man whose God guides it is rightly guided, but those whom he confounds will surely be lost. We have predestined for hell many jinn and many men.
Okay, thank you, Alec. So interesting here too. So here you have mention of God's mercy, but now we have something else prominently described here, which is the predestination. God does the choosing, both positively and negatively. So this is a moment where Islam looks exactly like Calvinism or Presbyterianism, as John Calvin established it, where you understand the significance of the idea of God's sovereignty. So this was in the mind of John Calvin, also in the mind of Muhammad and his followers, that how can we appreciate and therefore honor God by recognizing without recognizing that he's his sovereignty. In other words, our idea of God is going to be less than God if we're going to insist on a free will. If we're going to insist, we are the ones that determine what happens in our lives. So God has to have absolute sovereignty if he's going to be God. If we claim less than that about God, then we risk bringing God's wrath upon ourselves, because we're misrepresenting him, and really we're insulting him by denying a prominent feature of his character. Now, interestingly enough, there's lots of felicitous inconsistencies, they're called, or more simply, self-contradictions within philosophies and religions. So you'll remember that across all religious systems and the majority of Christianity and those claim and teach Christianity, that free will is constant. So even among Presbyterians and even among Muslims. Do humans have a free will? Yes. Well, how do you reconcile that we have a free will with God's sovereignty, especially when it comes to his making the choices for our life and predestining us? Well, that kind of explanation you have to listen to and read for yourself. But I've heard it, and it sounds to my ears simply as a contradiction. It's either one way or the other, and yet you'll hear people say, no, in some way, mysterious maybe or not, God's election or predestination of people both to heaven and to hell is not inconsistent with or not incompatible with human free will. And remember, on the human free will side of the equation, there's two features to that. One is to make sure no one blames God for the damnation of a person. It can't be God's fault. And secondly, because of the human insistence on autonomy, that people can't see how there's a way forward or how life is worth living or meaningful if we don't have power to make our own choices. So just to kind of leave that open question until next week, and we'll come back to it. Okay, so that's Islam. And now it's time to move forward into Judaism. So a couple things about Judaism before I let Natalia and Dorian take over. First of all, I hope that you have recognized and benefited from the organization of the religions as we made our way through this semester. So starting with Christianity as a religion that's probably the most familiar to us. And we live in a culture and in recent history, Western history especially, that has a history of interaction, relationship, assumptions about Christianity. So kind of get our structure of religion in place by way of something we're familiar with. Then second of all, to begin with a religion that claims to be the oldest, and that would be Hinduism, and then look at those religious systems that have a history with Hinduism, so Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and then move east and look at another center of religions, both because Buddhism kind of was forced to the east, and also because the interrelationship between these religions as really being compatible. So you remember the three jewels idea. So Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and then how those seem to be in the background. You see all three of those in Shinto. And then finally moving back to two other religions that have a background with Christianity by way of Abraham and by way of biblical text. So first Islam, and then finally Buddhism. The other thing we need to say is that which Judaism, and so I want to show you this slide. So there are four main branches of Judaism. In a way, they're like Christian denominations, but in a way not. And what I mean by that is if we want to know about Judaism, we really have to spend our time on Orthodox Judaism, because what we'll find in these other three systems is not a fundamental difference in the doctrine or teachings of Judaism, the way you find that those differences in Christian denominations. So there are fundamental doctrinal issues that separate the Christian denominations, regardless of whether they're conservative or liberal. But in Judaism, as soon as we move out of orthodoxy into these other three branches, what we're going to find is really kind of a non-practicing way of carrying forward kind of the substance of Judaism. In other words, all three of these other branches, conservative, reformed, and reconstructionist, will recognize their history in Orthodox Judaism, but they have that's sort of like a relic now in their homes and in their lives. And so they're carrying forward in different ways. So, for example, in America, the traditions of Judaism is what they practice. The actual truth of Orthodox Judaism is not on the table. In Europe, especially in Germany, then it's the ethical practices of Judaism that they carry forward. And then here in Reconstructionist Judaism, there's more of a romantic nostalgia. That's a really important word, a nostalgia about the past and history of Judaism, but now it's almost completely ethnic in a sense, but free to express itself in whatever way an individual seems inspired. Okay, now to get a little more out of this comparison here, what you'll notice here that's similar between Orthodox and conservative Judaism is this no mixed marriages, where you find in Reformed and Reconstructionists a yes to mixed marriages, and here in Europe, especially during the 20th century, you see a motivation for this because succeeding in a mixed marriage generation after generation gradually relieves this fear about and tensions over this idea of being Jewish, and therefore kind of a target for hostility and all sorts of other assumptions. Okay, now, in another way, you'll notice at the two ends of the spectrums, Orthodox Judaism can be radical and militant. You can see that in the conflict in the Middle East since 1948, but also Reconstructionist Judaism can be radical and militant the way you could see trouble in America during the 60s, for example, when people who were holding up two fingers claiming peace and were all about free love and make love not war, but those same college students in that age group of people were throwing rocks through windows and looting stores and burning cars and attacking police and so forth. So it was exceedingly radical and militant. Then here in the middle, conservative and reformed share a more moderate and a passive relationship with the culture around it. And then finally, Orthodox, as is appropriate, Orthodox Judaism is idealistic in nature, and I mean idealism is an approach to looking at religious systems that's very fruitful. What is the ideal of each different religion that we've looked at, and why not? So my experience, the ideal of a religious system is generally going to be or match what you guys found to be commendable in a religion, and that's worth thinking about. In the middle here again, more pragmatic, and so we can certainly be sympathetic with people no matter where they lived or when or what they confessed their religion to be, that found it necessary or certainly felt compelled to make adjustments in the thinking of in their religious thought, just in order to get along with the world. So I would say, for example, traditional conservative Christianity, for the most part, has gone silent in the last 100 years, just in order to not kind of provoke hostility against it. A lot of that had to do with just uncertainty about right or wrong. There were and still are kind of noisy people who are radical and militant, I would say, and claiming Christianity is the basis for that. But they're certainly at the fringe and disavowed by most of Christianity. And then here, interestingly, in contrast to idealism, the Reconstructionists are going to claim autonomy. So each individual is autonomous within the religious system. And here we find an interesting point of contact with the origins of the Baptist Church, where in response to the kind of the heavy-handedness and the monarchical feel of Roman Catholicism, the Baptist Church claiming on the basis of Jesus himself and Jesus' teaching that people need to be autonomous. And so in modern times now, I think you can find this layer, a growing, maybe even a majority. Let's say, let's take out the idea for a spin that the majority of people who claim any religious system today, especially Christianity, operate functionally with the idea of autonomy, is that each person has the right to think and believe what is true on the basis of their experience and reading and so forth, and we owe that to each person to respect and honor that autonomy in religious practice. Okay, so here you go, Natalia and Dorian. I'll let you go back and forth as you see fit, and I'll advance your slides.
All right, so for the origins, it's known as one of the earliest religions in
Oops, sorry.
in relation to a monotheistic religion. It is rooted in the creation story from the beginning of time, and its civilization began with Abraham and connects further with Israel, who are known as some of the first people. God revealed himself to the chosen people known as the Israelites, who became the people of the Jewish faith. And from my interviewee, she said that some of the earliest things that they call upon for the proof of this is their scriptures, I guess, written on sheepskin, and that's where they kind of get their roots and their basis for this religion, which again is one of the oldest monotheistic religions, which was really important because that's kind of something new as we just gone over what we just said with the religions we have just gone through, with starting with Hinduism and continuing down. So this was one of the most important changes in religions that we're seeing around the world, which shifted to monotheism.
Okay, thank you, Natalia. And just so you had an interviewee, that's so great when that's possible. And was this person Orthodox Jew?
So she didn't tell me what specifically, but based off of what I got from her was that she was more of like a reformed believer, and she was very not super strict, but had beliefs in emphasis in the home mostly. She was
Okay.
in, you have to do this, you have to do that. It was very rooted in kind of the practices of like the earlier times before it was institutionalized, you might say.
Okay, thank you. I'm guessing that the person you interviewed is similar to friends I have that actually live in one of those $1 million houses around our campus. But I was invited to their home on a Friday to have a meal with them, and I mean the husband is a nuclear physicist from Russia. They're both from Russia, Russian Jews. The wife is a medical doctor, and so outside of their traditions, very mainstream, modern, Western function, but the traditions are. So this looks just like what conservative Judaism describes. So we'll kind of have a look back as we go along to Orthodox Judaism, but then we'll keep in mind that these answers are from a conservative Jew. Okay, next.
So again, it's monotheistic, and then God chose the Israelites to be his chosen people and delivered them through their bonds. As we've seen, I'm sure everyone's a little bit acquainted with the Old Testament at least, they have gone through a period of turmoil, ups and downs, and being enslaved and being freed and all of that stuff. So the Jewish people are descendants of the Israelites for the most part, who went through that turmoil and struggle, and God said, I'm going to choose the lowest of the low people, the slaves, the suffering, all those people, so that I can save them from all of the turmoils of this earth. And they follow the teachings of the Torah, which is in what we know as the Old Testament, what the Jewish people refer to as the Tanakh, which is their Bible. My interviewee referred to it as the Bible. And the Torah, which includes the first 5 books of the Bible. And it's based off of what I spoke with her about. She said that most of what their day-to-day is like and what their beliefs are is rooted in focused on doing good for the people around them and doing good things for the generations to come, and making something of themselves in this world, to do what's right, to do what's just, and to pass that down. She said it's very strongly rooted in the ancestral teachings, the oral teachings, and then day-to-day guidance with the scriptures and the written accounts, the written teachings they have are, little, I can't think of the word, but, like little motivators and reminders and stuff. And most of what she said that she learned from the religion was what she learned from her family or from going to Bible school. But she did not reference any type of big leader or a rabbi or a priest, anything like that, that she had taken a strong learning from. She really emphasized the fact that it was something that was very much practiced in the home, and based off of what your parents, your grandparents, all of that type of stuff, what they did and what they said.
Okay, thank you very much. So actually plenty of things Natalia just both read and mentioned on the basis of this slide. I hope not to forget any of them. So I'm going to start with what you mentioned about doing good things and making something of your life. So the idea that your life is a stewardship that's granted to you by God, or it could be the way, like in Taoism, but you have a responsibility and an opportunity to make something of that. You're an artist and you're given medium to work with, and so get working. And again, part of that idea it just simply has to do with effort, making the effort, but also with an eye towards accomplishments. So if you look up, I don't want you to do this now, but if you remember after class, or if you're interested in it, if you look up the Nobel Prize winners in the history of Nobel Prizes, you will find a impressive number of Jewish people on that list. So there is some serious, motivation in their life to accomplish things. Part of that could be a history or a looking back to reflecting on the history of both bondage, not just in Egypt, but also Assyria and Babylon, and the Holocaust and oppression in more recent, modern times. It doesn't look or sound very modern when you try when you attempt genocide against a people. Like, how is that modern? But it happened in modern times. So they're motivated to succeed and to try and recover what they experienced under the rule of David in Old Testament times. Monotheistic, so we're going to maybe talk about that more, but like Islam, not really compatible with the Christian notions of a Trinity, even though Christianity is going to claim monotheism too, and defend that very powerfully. So Torah is a Hebrew word. It means law. And this is why it can be confusing to people. So the Torah can refer to the Torah of Moses, so those first 5 books of the Old Testament, which were written down and preserved by Moses. But Torah in general can refer to the whole Old Testament, as a book of the Bible, just like gospel can refer to the 4 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John in the New Testament. But some people, when they say the gospel, mean to include the whole New Testament or even the whole Bible. And then finally, this ancestral teaching. So here's another interesting feature of Judaism is the one thing that people might be sympathetic about is that Israel has not had a homeland, its own homeland, since the Babylonian captivity. So since 500 BC, and so that's a long time, from 500 BC to 1948, for a religion to exist without a place to call home. Yet, on the other hand, this could you can argue that this is precisely why Judaism is still with us. So, because they didn't have a physical location away from home to identify with, it was that much more important, even necessary, that Judaism was perpetuated within the home. And then you also kind of get a synergy between a national identity and a racial identity, because race is real in Judaism. We are different races, not all one human family. And then the ethnicity of Judaism and their religious practices. So the synergy of all of those components kind of work together to have preserved Jews and Judaism through the course of time.
And then I don't know if Dorian is here, but I can just continue on for the rest of them.
Yeah, Dorian is not here. That's
Okay.
unfortunate. But yeah, so Natalia, thanks for doing all the heavy lifting today.
No problem. So some of their general practices, like I stated before, they're based in good morals. So a lot of their actions, their words, everything is based around how is this going to affect the people around me. My interviewee, especially like over and over again, a lot of the answers to my questions were, we just do what is just, we do what is right, and we hope that, the people around us do the same. We try to set an example for our family, for our kids, so that we can live in harmony with each other. They're very selfless and consider other people. Like I said, their worship and practice mostly takes place in their home. They do go to temple or to the synagogue to celebrate holidays, the high holidays, which I do have a list of those. So we have Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, which is about their high holidays are about like a 10-day period from September to October, with beginning with Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and then ends with Yom Kippur, which they know as the Day of Atonement. My interviewee had let me know that on the Day of Atonement, they believe that God sets out your plan. So they believe that you are, your destiny is decided on that day. And then there's other high holidays as well that are Passover, Pentecost, and then the Tabernacles, which Passover celebrates the Passover that we know from the Old Testament, and the Exodus from Egypt. Pentecost is when the laws were given on Mount Sinai, and then the Tabernacles is the journey in the wilderness, the long period of time that they spent looking for the promised land. So on those days of remembrance or high holidays, they will go to the temple. And the temple is mostly just a gathering place. You don't need to necessarily gather in the temple or the synagogue, as my interview said, as long as it's you worship with 10 or more people, that is considered to be, you know, uh, worthy of the title of worship, I guess. And then they do have some dietary restrictions. As we kind of went over before, it kind of depends on what sect you um, identify with and what, you know, how serious you take things. But you shouldn't consume dairy and meat products in the same meal. Um, you shouldn't eat pork. You should not ever consume blood. Shellfish is a no-no, and then prescribed foods, which is if there's like if you live in a place that has an illegal food, you know, if you can't if sharks are illegal to eat, you shouldn't consume those. So it kind of could depend on the region that you're from, and a lot of those dietary restrictions actually are rooted in sanitary, you know, looking out for your hygiene for the most part, for your well-being, because you know, pigs are infamously known to live, eat, and you know, just be in feces, and they're not fed well and all that type of stuff, or at least historically. I'm sure that even now, if you went to a farm, you would kind of see how, you know, unclean certain conditions are. So for the pork, you know, they say you shouldn't consume it just because, you know, why would you want to consume something that consumes uh, garbage, you know. Um, so they have a strong emphasis on that. You know, stay away from those things. And, you know, I think it makes sense because a lot of the guidelines and rules we take to an extreme and we don't see the purpose of them. And I think with, you know, this specific thing, you know, with those dietary restrictions, it's just more for your health. You know, some people, their stomach gets upset when they have meat and dairy together. It's a lot of stuff, you know, curdling of things and this and that isn't good for your body. So it does make sense. And a lot of times it's lost in translation or lost over time. But it was interesting to me to realize, you know, they don't eat pork because of the hygiene behind it. And then as for the Sabbath, is every Friday, and some people do, you know, the Friday to Sunday thing. Some people just do Friday nights, but typically you're supposed to be more reverent on the Sabbath. So, you know, my interviewee said on Friday nights, typically we would stay in the house, we would have dinner at home, we wouldn't go out and party, we wouldn't drink, we wouldn't hang out with friends. You know, we're not going roller skating every night and this and that. It's more of a day to remember and to um, be reverent of on those days, just once a week. For some people who take the Sabbath to a more extreme, they won't do any physical labor. That could include even turning on the oven. And for me, I think it's funny, my oven at home has a Sabbath mode on it. So you can turn it on and set it to Sabbath, and it will cook your food, you know, the next day for you without you having to push any buttons or doing this or that. Um, you know, some people, they don't use electronics on that day because, you know, it's requiring work and this and that. They won't cook or clean, and typically they're asked to do, you know, unless it is for worship or for your health and livelihood, they say don't do it. So that is how they treat the Sabbath. I know that for a lot of other people, the Sabbath is just a day to worship, but for them, it's a day to worship and to not do any work, which again, I think is rooted in good practice because we all do need a break at some point. And, you know, for something to be required of to say, hey, on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, take a day off and reset and relax and, you know, don't overwhelm yourself so that you can go into the week, you know, clear-headed, clear-minded, and start off on a good foot and have a productive work week. I know that Dr. Alec had said that a lot of people are successful, very successful from the Jewish faith. And I think that, you know, I've heard a lot of times, oh, they're lawyers, they're this, they're that, they're rich, they have so much money. But I think it's because if you take it seriously, you can avoid feeling overrun and you can, you know, give your all to your work and everything like that. So those are just some of the general practices of the Jewish people, kind of in different realms. I have a little bit of dietary, a little bit of daily, and then, kind of those high holidays, try to hit all those different points and see different parts of their lives that are affected by their faith.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Couple comments. So Sabbath, um, interestingly, in more modern times and in Western nations, just within the 20th century, so it wasn't that long ago, that the working class person, they kind of worked together to establish not just a day of rest, which historically was Sunday, but actually 2 days. So a 2-day weekend, a 5-day, 40-hour work week. So actually 8 hours a day for 5 days seemed like a little better than just a Sabbath. But it certainly made room for or protected the idea of a Sabbath. And for decades, um, Sunday, if you were a Christian, or Saturday, if you were a Jew, was really taken seriously, as in businesses weren't open, people weren't expected to work, and other activities weren't scheduled. And so, just over my tenure, just over a 12-year period in a Lutheran church in Michigan, when I arrived there in 1988, Sundays, the whole day of Sunday and Wednesday evenings were blacked out of calendars to protect people's religious practices. In 12 years' time, that went away. And in fact, Wednesday evenings and all day Sunday from first thing in the morning were packed with all kinds of, usually sports activities, but all kinds of other things that people did, and kind of displacing that protected environment for church. And then also, just in terms of the work week, for many people, that 40-hour work week has been lost. And especially with the business advantages of not employing people in a full-time status. So part-time workers usually don't have the best schedule, because it's a mix and match and here and there, and you don't get the best hours of the day and so forth. So it's really hard to see that happen. And then on the other hand, like in Europe, particularly France, you found the people to kind of continue to advance this idea that rest and recreation is good, and advocate for a 4-day work week and 3 days off. And there's been some experimentation with this in the United States, but some of the findings indicate that 4 10-hour days, people get more done in 4 10-hour days than they do in 5 8-hour days. And so some businesses have moved to that. In medicine, a lot of nurses are working 12-hour shifts. So like 3 12-hour shifts or so. So anyway, that's another conversation, I guess. Worship and practice. Here's another interesting feature in Judaism. I think pretty much distinct from all the other religions we've looked at. In Judaism, there was a command to build a structure and to have that in a certain place. Here's another interesting moment in the interaction between human nature and its will to prevail, and religion and the notion of God. So God told Moses to build a tabernacle. It was a tent, and that was on purpose. So the tent was to remind Israel that they were descendants of Abraham, who saw himself as a stranger and a traveler, a sojourner, during his physical life in a material world. And so Abraham was a wealthy man, but lived his whole lifetime in tents because he was looking for a better homeland, the Bible says, for a place whose architect and builder was God, that was permanent and everlasting and so forth. So Abraham very obviously lived what he believed, that this life in a material world was not the essence of us, but the extension of us, and temporary, through which we learned spiritual lessons in our soul, which looked forward to the inheritance that God promised. Okay, so interestingly, when David comes along, not only does he do away with the tent where God was in the midst of his people, but he moved the location. So David inaugurates the building of a material, physical temple of stone and wood and gold, and he moves it to Jerusalem, which is the center of the real estate that belonged to Judah. Now, that led to the idea, of course, that the laws of the Old Testament worship practices had to be practiced there. So, of course, every day and all day long, Jewish people practiced their faith in their homes and so forth. So it still was very much home based. But kind of like Islam, there was a holy place on the map. So, like Mecca, so there's Jerusalem. And on certain high feast days, you were expected, also like Islam, unless you had, extenuating circumstances, you were expected to be there. Now, because of foreign empires, especially after the Roman Empire destroyed the temple for the last time and the Jews were scattered, a secondary building project seemed necessary, and that's the origin of the synagogue. So already from the history of the Assyrian captivity and Babylonian, by the time you get to Jesus in the New Testament, there are synagogues established in various locations, even though there is a temple at that time. So Herod had rebuilt the temple. But there seemed to be a need for a physical location and structure for people to gather in. So a synagogue means to come together or lead together. So it's just describing this meeting and meeting place. But then that becomes worldwide, of course. And after the Romans in 70 AD destroy the temple for the last time, and because others have owned the place where the temple is supposed to be ever since then. So here's what's an interesting moment. I would argue, on the basis of Orthodox Judaism in the Old Testament, on the basis of the Hebrew Scriptures, that if the Jews wanted to reinaugurate the practice that's required in the Old Testament, they don't need the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, because the tabernacle was in Shechem, which is north of Jerusalem, quite a ways. It actually was in Samaria, what became Samaria, but present day, part of the Israeli state. So they actually own the real estate where worship is supposed to take place. And if I were them, I would reconstruct that tent according to the description in the Torah that God gave to Moses, and then get that going, reinstitute the sacrificial system. So that's a very interesting thing to think about, is what they think they're not allowed to do but need to do to inaugurate the Messianic age, meaning rebuild the stone temple in Jerusalem. That's not actually what the Bible says they're supposed to do. So anyway, in contrast to that, then of course, the other religions kind of generally speak against a single structure in a single place, but think about yourself, your own person, as being the location where God lives and dwells with you constantly. And yet, the history of what we assume is Christianity went back to, it's kind of the genie in the lamp idea, but building a physical structure and to a certain extent in a particular place. So if you're Roman Catholic, there are basilicas and cathedrals and parishes around the world, but nothing like the Vatican in Rome. Or if you're Orthodox, like Constantinople, the Basilica in Constantinople, St. John's. And then, of course, the Buddhist built temples and the Shinto. I think the Shinto would be next closest to Judaism in terms of being expected to build a shrine, physical shrines in places where you would honor the emperor and ancestors and so forth. Okay, so thank you. Next slide.
So some notes on salvation and global problems according to my interviewee was, for salvation, she believes that good things will bring you to good places, and being kind and just and right will lead to good things. Once again, she did mention that fact that she believed that her fate was decided during Yom Kippur. It's and then that it's not really based on creed, but it's based on deed, which some branches of monotheistic religions, they don't believe in that. They believe, oh, based off of just what you believe in, you will be accepted into heaven. But for the Jewish people, they do believe that your actions do take part in your fate, I guess. And then some of the problems that she thinks that we're facing right now is illness, evil, and technology. And technology, she said it could be good and it could be bad, but if you're using it in the wrong way, it can lead to a lot of problems, which is something that she said that she thinks gets in the way of. Those three things definitely get in the way of religion. It gets in the way of doing good things. And how many people fall into the trap of using social media for a negative thing. So those are just kind of some basic things that she went over. And I thought it was interesting that it's based off of, as I said, deed, not creed. So meaning, it's not all about, oh, I believe in God, so I'm saved. It's, if I believe in God, then my actions should reflect that. I shouldn't be doing poor things to my neighbor. I should be taking care of them. And, they have the 10 Commandments as well. That's an Old Testament thing. And so they try to live out their life in accordance with that, and in accordance with who, the people of the line of David is. And they, look up to Moses and Abraham. She mentioned those two as some of the biggest people who would their actions and live off of that, based off of that. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We lost your mic there for a minute, but okay, thank you. Yeah, so deeds, not creeds or words. So that brings us back to this notion of hypocrisy, and I suppose people of all religious convictions at one time or another, to a certain extent, are accused of hypocrisy, especially by the more fundamentalist or conservative practitioners. But in my experience, because I've run in what's considered Christian circles, that has been a constant, really withering criticism of Christianity. And it's kind of, there's this notion of like God as a wealthy parent. And so sometimes, and maybe you're familiar with this even or know people, where the children of wealthy, powerful people kind of do whatever they feel like doing because they know that their parents will fix it. They're not actually worried about, being in prison or in jail, or they're not worried about drug use or alcoholism or something, because their parents are always there kind of to catch them, and that's, God's just a bigger version of that. On the other hand, there are people who grow up with very strict and I think conscientious parents who say, hey, there's cause and effect, there's actions and consequences, and when it comes to accidents or things that are beyond your control, the parents are absolutely there for the children. But when it comes to the exercise of their own will, which is evil or contrary to what they've been raised to practice, the parents are like, hey, you're on your own. You break the law, you get arrested, you do the time. I'm not going to save you from that because you had it coming, so to speak. And that's a necessary element of goodness, that you have to know the consequences of evil if you're going to have hope of escaping it or being freed from it, both to some extent now and hopefully permanently in the future.
And then for practices and organization, some of the practices, as I kind of previously discussed, was that many Jewish people only go to temple on high holidays. It's not necessarily a weekly thing. It's most of them believe about it's more important to pass down the tradition via oral tradition and looking at how their family has lived and kind of reflecting that, mirroring that in their own lives and in their for their next generation and for the generations to come. um, and then some of the more day-to-day practices include 3 times of prayer during the morning, afternoon, and then after sunset. And they are central to Israel. So they, we kind of discussed that they didn't have a place to call home necessarily for so long because it was taken away from them. When the temple was destroyed a second time, there was just fighting over the land. There was, debate between do we rebuild, do we not rebuild, all this stuff. So that's why it kind of, you know, took more importance in the home. And that was really strongly emphasized to me, as you can see throughout this whole presentation. That's been one of the key factors. Is it's very home based. It's very much about, they do practice, outside of the home as well, but it's more emphasized in how we bring this to our family. And then some of the rituals for the Orthodox that I did go over this already, so I'll just briefly go through it. Friday night on the Sabbath, people stay in, they don't go out to eat, they don't see a movie, they don't, celebrate on those days. As my interviewee said, she said we would stay in and light a candle. They don't use electronics, the ovens, the lights, the heaters. There's some people who really just shut down everything. And I've worked with families who say, sorry, we can't have you come over this weekend to do a therapy session because it's a Sabbath. We're not allowed to do work. Our kids can't do work. And, even, sometimes the type of therapy I gave wasn't essential to the livelihood, I guess, of the child for those days. So it, you are permitted to do work if it's for the health and benefit of someone. But, some families believe, hey, doing, emotional things or like cognitive therapy, it's not essential. So they would say, don't come on Sunday, let's not do that, or don't come on Friday, whenever they did celebrate the Sabbath, because as my interviewee said, it does differ for some people, which is interesting to me, but it just depends on, what you consider. And then there's specific organizations of the belief system, which is following the Torah and the teachings of their ancestors. There's some hierarchy in their what I would refer to as their church or, temple, but not as much as other religious systems. She did say that, her husband was Christian or Catholic, I believe, and she said, we don't believe what you guys do with, the priests and the deacons and the bishops and the Pope and this and that. It's a little different. And there's actually, I did want to mention 2 different types. We kind of went over it in the beginning, but there's, I think I'm saying this right, rabbinical or non-rabbinical beliefs. So some people have more faith in the teachings of the rabbis. So they think like, oh, I can trust this person as a speaker of God. And other people say, that's not what we believe. We believe in the scriptures and the teachings, but we're not going to go to, give power and authority to the rabbis, teachers, to dictate what we can or can't do. We're going to refer to our texts. So there's kind of those 2 little differences in the like institutional organization there. I think that's it for this slide.
Okay, good. Thank you. And so what you were talking about last of all, I think there are parallels in most other religions. So, for example, in Islam, so that you have the difference between the Sunni and the Shiites who are following the physical descent of Muhammad are going to stick with the Quran, not really any additions, where in Sunnis they have these caliphs that followed Muhammad that continued to give clarity and exposition of what the Quran was teaching. In Christianity, Roman Catholicism, by way of the papacy, continues to add clarity or address certain issues or questions or matters that's supposed to be authoritative, where other like Lutherans, for example, or most other Christian denominations would say, no, it's the Bible, that's it. You can't add to that. You have to always go back to it. And so also in Eastern religions. So most of them, I don't know if all of them, but most of them have monks and monasteries, and many people look to the traditions and the teachings of the monks, like Jews would to rabbis, as helpful, as kind of some assurance that we're on the right track here, because I have a living I have an embodiment of the religion, whether it's in a pope or a monk or a rabbi who's giving me some sense of confidence that I got this right.
All right, and then for good and evil, this is one of the most interesting things to me while interviewing my person, was that she had mentioned to me that that part of being human and part of living is, there's good and evil, and it just depends on what you decide to do with it. You can decide to act in a good way, you can decide to act in an evil way, but it's up to you to make that decision. And she said a lot of times people's ability to decide between those two comes from how you're raised and how you're brought up. She mentioned to me that there's no devil or evil figure in Judaism. There is just good and evil and right and wrong. So to me, I took it as, wow, that's the whole entire religion is taking accountability for their actions, for their, good or bad behaviors. They're not saying, oh, the devil did this. They're not saying, some evil force came down and did this. They say it's us. It's what we have done. It's what, I decided to do, which I think is really important to do. And then something that was mentioned to me outside of this interview by a pastor who worked with a lot of people, he had told me that the people that he has worked with of the Jewish faith, they will typically take something bad and they will find the good in it. And I definitely grew up learning that in a bad situation, God will always bring something to you from it. There will always be some type of positive benefit of it, even if it's the worst thing in the world. And something that I was explained to by this priest, he said, I met with this group of people and they had lost a couple people in a car accident. And he said, their response to it was, thank God for another day of living. Thank God for, the other 3 people surviving, and thank God for us being able to remember these people and do the good things that they did. And although it's something that's very terrible and it hurt them, they didn't say, like, how could you do this to us, God? Or they couldn't say, the person who hit this car is so bad and so evil. They just said, this is the good that came from it, and we can remember these people and bring honor to their names, but we're not going to take, the negative side of it, and they're not going to blame anyone else for it, which I thought was really commendable. I thought it was very, honorable to say, we're not going to just blame this one bad thing on someone else. So that to me was very interesting. There's no evil figure, so it's very much it's on me to do the right thing. And that was very, very pressing to me. It made me think about how I think about things in my own life. Oh, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's our time for today. One thing I want to give Dorian. I think he's been trying to get in by way of his phone, which means something in his internet's not working, and the phone wasn't working either. So I don't want you to think badly of Dorian. I think he's been trying, and so hopefully he'll be with. I'll contact him, and hopefully he can be with us on Thursday. And so we'll pick up where we left off then. Thank you very much, Natalia, and everybody else. God bless you and be with you these days. I think we're kind of getting used to this generally, and I've heard it like this is working, like the curve is flattening kind of thing, and that's encouraging. And so take care and blessings in your studies, and I'll see you on Thursday.